All right, let's go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the very first and inaugural Celigo user group meeting. I'm Cory Anderson. I'll be hosting and doing the presentation today. We'll go ahead and jump into what we can expect here. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the Celigo user group. The user group is brand new. We do have a website, and it is celigousergroup.com. The website will it'll tell you about upcoming meetings. We'll also have our past meeting recordings, and we have a handlebar repository that we're going to start there that will give some examples of handlebar use cases and kind of explain what they do. So actually, I'm just going to switch over to that website real quick just to show everybody what that looks like. So we have our next meeting, so that'll be posted here, and then I'll always have a link to register for the next meeting there. We'll have a place for our past meetings. There's nothing there because this is the very first one. We'll have some handlebar references, and I'll just jump into this just real quick and show you. So in our handlebar references, we're going to have basically a little bit of a description of what the use case is. We'll have the handlebar itself. You can just copy that nice and easy. And then we'll have a sample payload that handlebar was basically created for. You can copy that and use that for testing and whatnot. So yeah, so go ahead and bookmark the user group. And if you've signed up, you're on the list at this point to get notification of upcoming meetings. And we'll have all of our past meetings and everything posted there. So you can also have your colleagues sign up on our contact page. That'll make sure that they get notified of the upcoming meetings as well. Have our handlebar example repository. And so if you have any handlebar examples that you think are really helpful or useful or might be useful for other people in the community, please feel free to email that to info@celigousergroup.com. I'd love to hear from you and what kind of handlebar examples you've created. So our user group is going to we're going to join. We're going to have a meeting bi-monthly, and so I say starting in February, but that's just the beginning of the year. So obviously we're starting this one in December, but basically every other month starting in February will be our meetings, and you will get notifications of those upcoming meetings when you've signed up, which you've all signed up already. I also wanted to just mention that the Celigo user group is an independent organization. Thank you, Celigo, for your support. And we are excited to get this user group up and running off the ground and build a really strong community around it. As part of our meetings, we're going to have an open forum at the end of each meeting. That open forum is a time for anybody that's here to ask a question of the group. Maybe it's a challenge with an integration that you're working with, or something you don't understand about Celigo, or whatever it is. It's a time you can ask any questions. We can also follow up with any questions from the meeting content in that open forum session. And if we get to that point and nobody has any questions, that's fine, no problems. But the space will be there for everybody to help each other out. I'd also like to say that we have an attendee raffle today. So Celigo has generously provided three $50 Amazon gift cards. So we'll do a random drawing for everybody that attended the meeting today for those, and then I'll announce the winners of those Amazon gift cards on LinkedIn after we do the random choosing. At the end of the meeting, we'll post. I'm going to pop up a survey, and that just kind of helps us see how we're doing. We'd like to know what topics that you want to learn about, since this is a brand new user group. We have ideas certainly about the different things that we want to cover in some of these meetings. But we definitely want to hear from you, the types of things that you want to learn about. And then also, if you'd be interested in presenting to the group, please note that in the survey. There's a survey question for that as well. We'll definitely be looking for subject matter experts to do presentations as we go through time with the user group. So I'd also like to mention, if you're new to Celigo, if you haven't used Celigo before, you're just curious about what the capabilities are, you can go to celigo.com. there is a try for free option, and you can sign up for a free 30-day account. I believe that account gives you unlimited flows that you can build and work on. I'm don't hold me to this, but I also believe that you can maintain a free account with a couple of endpoints and one flow indefinitely. So if you haven't tried Celigo before, if you haven't used it, you can go sign up for free and at least get a 30-day trial for free. So with that, I'm going to jump into the main content of our meeting today and just make sure that I am recording. Yep, looks like we're recording. So today's topic is fundamentals of integrating with NetSuite. I'll just tell you a little bit about myself, first of all. Cory Anderson, I'm the founder of Stratos ERP Partners. We are a Celigo partner. We are also a NetSuite Alliance partner. We specialize in all things NetSuite and all things Celigo, and especially NetSuite Celigo integrations, but we do integrations between other systems that don't involve NetSuite as well. I've been working with Celigo for I think 7 years now. I started out just kind of helping people figure out what to do with their integrations, and just learned over time, and kind of went through a lot of the different trainings that Celigo offers, which are really good, and have done a ton of integrations in that past 7 years. I will also mention that I don't know everything there is to know about Celigo, and that's why one of the main reasons that we started this user group is, one, to help us grow. And interesting fact, as I was building this presentation for today, there's one or two things that I learned as I was building it, of maybe some features that I didn't really know existed as I was going through some of the different areas that we're going to talk about. So I'm always learning. I think it's a constant learning process, especially any system like Celigo and NetSuite as well. And so that's the point of this group. And even if you've used Celigo before and you've done integrations, our goal is to give you, maybe you walk away with one or two new tips or tricks or things that you didn't know before. And I would call that a win if you learn at least one new thing today. So with that said, we'll go ahead and jump into the main agenda today. So I'm going to talk about, this should be moving forward. Okay. So yeah. That reminds me. Thank you, Patrick. So if you have any questions throughout the content today, please feel free to post those questions in the chat window here, and we'll try and answer them as we go. We also have a verified Celigo expert with us today, Tyler Lamparter from Celigo. And Tyler, if you recognize his name, it's probably because you've been on the Celigo Connective, and he is very active on the Connective. So Tyler, thanks for joining today. We appreciate it. We don't expect anything from you, but we appreciate you being here. Thank you.
No worries. Thanks, Cory. I'll have to hop out early at some point anyways for other calls,
Okay.
I think we maybe have a couple Sligo people on here too, so you can remove us from the raffle. I don't want to be biased in our give ourselves
Okay.
money. So yeah.
Sounds good. Thanks. All right. So here's our agenda for today. We are going to talk about exports out of NetSuite. We're going to talk about listeners, which is a type of export. We'll talk about transferring files out of NetSuite, lookups, which are an important part of using or building flows with anything, but obviously we're focusing on the NetSuite part of it today. And then we're going to talk about imports into NetSuite. So with that, I'll go ahead and jump on in. And also, I'm going to jump into Celigo I have some demo flows set up. I have a NetSuite demo account that we'll use to kind of show things in action. And so it's not just a whole presentation of slides. I'll also have some live content as well. So first of all, I'm going to get my little laser pointer, kind of like this guy. So we're talking about exports. So exports enable querying NetSuite data by building safe searches. And there's different types of exports, but this topic is focusing on a scheduled export, or which uses safe searches. So using safe searches, basically you can ensure that those searches contain all of the necessary data for that integration flow. If data from a record 2 tables away cannot be included in a single search, a lookup can be used to retrieve that data. And I do have an example of using a lookup for records that are a couple tables away in NetSuite, where you can't pull in all of that data to one save search. Another advantage of this type of export is that data can be transformed prior to export, and you can use formulas to tailor the output for the downstream processes. So if you can build formulas with like SQL formulas in that save search, you can transform the data in NetSuite before it gets into the flow, and then you have less transformations or handlebars or anything data manipulation on the Celigo side. Scheduled flows can be run as frequently as every 5 minutes. There's a wide range of times, anywhere from an hour to, I think, twice a day or once a day or once a week. But if you go to the custom scheduling option, then you can schedule it as frequently as every 5 minutes. And so exports serve a fundamental mechanism for integrating NetSuite data with other systems. So talk a little bit about the save searches for the exports. Using save searches to query the NetSuite data. So build a save search containing all of the data that you need in the flow. And I'll show you an example of a save search that I built just for a quick example today. You can query NetSuite data efficiently by customizing the search criteria. So you can customize the search criteria in Celigo. You can also do it in the save search itself, which I prefer to do it in the save search in this type of example, but we can look at doing it both ways. Again, if a record is 2 tables away, cannot be added to an individual search, you use a lookup. I have an example that is a package record that applies to like a 3PL that creates item fulfillments in your system automatically. And then you can also transform data prior to using export using formulas within the save search. Lookups, useful for accessing records 2 tables away from the primary record. You can get extra data that's not available in the export data directly. Lookups complement save searches by bridging gaps in data retrieval and enhance integration flows by combining save searches with lookups for comprehensive data exports. And a lookup also uses a save search, so you can tailor the information that is pulled out of NetSuite with that lookup step. So some advantages of the scheduled flows: frequency of execution. Like I said, you can schedule the flows to run as often as every 5 minutes. That's near real-time data integration. There is a listener option, which is a true real-time, but we'll talk about that one. Build safe searches that contain all the data needed in the flow. You can use the lookups and then data transformation. So we've covered all of that. In the export step in Celigo, there are some key attributes. First of all, we have the record type, which I'm going to go into Celigo and show you at this point what this looks like, but we'll just document it here. So we have the record type. So it specifies the type of record in NetSuite that you're exporting. You define the save search. And in this case, you want to create the save search in NetSuite first. And I'll talk a little bit about some tips and tricks around doing the save searches. You can add additional search criteria within that export step in Celigo, and then you choose the export type. So at this point, I'm going to flip over to NetSuite or to Celigo and NetSuite, and we'll look at what that export looks like. So I do have a quick sidetrack here. I am interested to know, let me see. I have a survey. Thought I had a survey. Sorry, I'm trying to find my survey. Maybe I have to stop my share. And if I can't, I may not be able to do my survey. Let me see here. Sorry about this. I don't know where my surveys are. Nope, for some reason my surveys are not showing up right now, so I have a little bit of a setup issue. So that means that I'll send out a meeting survey at the end of the meeting. Well, we'll send it by email instead. Um, Pierce, if you can find the surveys in the Zoom window in the Zoom, that might be good, but I'm not seeing it. So that's all right. So the first thing that I actually wanted to survey the group on was how you feel about Celigo's new dark mode. Since I can't do a survey on it, I'll just stay in the light mode. But I will just take a quick second to show you. If you don't know about the dark mode, it's in this little drop down right up here in the upper right hand corner, and you just click on dark mode and you get this nice dark mode. I personally, I'll tell you, I really like dark mode. I think it's a big enhancement. I really like the design. I think that there's a lot more contrast and it's easier to see things. Like for example, these off on switch on the different flows. I think is really nice. So, but since I can't query everybody right now, I'm going to just stay in light mode because that's what probably most people are familiar with at this point. So we're talking about exports, and I have a demo flow here. And what I'm going to do is just pop up this export step. So this export step, I've named it get IF to update. And we can tell that this is a scheduled flow because there is a schedule up here that we can choose and set the different timing on. As I click into the export step here, these are the basic attributes that I just talked about. So obviously you want to name your step. I like to name it something that's descriptive. I get IF or item fulfillment to update. You have to choose your connection. In most cases, if you're an end user, you're just going to have one NetSuite connection. And then let's see. Pierce, you said like this message for dark mode. Yep. So next is you choose the record type. So the record type that you choose here has to match the record type of the saved search that you're pulling out of NetSuite. And I have seen a very unique use case where the item type or the record type doesn't show in the list, and there's this custom process you can do to pull it differently. But in general, 99.9% of the time, this record type needs to match the record type of your saved search. The saved search, this is where we define the search that we've created in NetSuite. And then we have a couple of other options here in the export attributes. I also talked about the additional search criteria. So you can choose additional search criteria here. Think about creating a saved search in NetSuite. This is very similar to creating an extra level of criteria. When the flow runs, Celigo will actually update the criteria in that saved search as it runs, even if you can't see that criteria in the saved search itself, but it'll use whatever you put in here. Personally, I prefer to, in this scenario, to put all the criteria in the saved search in NetSuite so that it's all in one spot.
So
and then this last one here is this export type. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, to clarify, Cory, it actually appends the criteria there to whatever criteria is already in your search.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. So whatever's in the saved search in NetSuite, it'll add to that. That's right. Thank you, Tyler. Great point. So then the last part here that I mentioned is this export type. And so the export type is, in this case, it's set to all. It's going to export all the data that comes up in the saved search every time. There's also the option to only export modified data. If you do that, then you choose the field, the date field, basically, that you want to use in that Delta search or the Delta export type. There's once. This one basically allows you to create a custom field in NetSuite or something that already exists. And when the flow runs, it'll mark that field as checked. And so Boolean is a checked checkbox type field in NetSuite. So when the flow runs, like I said, it'll check that field so that it won't export that again in the future. It'll only export once. And then this limit, this is basically you like if you have like 100 records in NetSuite and you only want to export one at a time or 10 at a time or 50 at a time, maybe you can use this for testing, for example, or maybe you need to limit the number of records that are coming in. You can use this as a tool to limit those number of records, maybe for downstream operations. The always export all data is what we're going to leave it set at right now. And then just one other quick note, there's a bunch of extra advanced features and custom settings. I'm not going to cover all of that right now because I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. We'll maybe cover some of those other things in other meetings. The only other thing I'll mention right now is this group rows. And the group rows is useful if you're exporting, let's say you're exporting a set of sales orders out of NetSuite and you want to group the line, you want to group those and you want to group the line items of that export into one record that will be just something will be done with it downstream in this flow. So you can use that function to group records, and you might also combine that with a transformation in the export step. So that's kind of the fundamentals of these exports. One other handy little thing I'll show you is that you can click on this little up arrow, and this will take you to that save search in NetSuite. I prefer personally to always make those searches public, and I always append the search name with bracket Celigo so that I know that this save search is being used in a Celigo flow. So that if any other user in NetSuite looks at it, they won't mess with that save search. Well, as an admin, you can mess with everybody's save searches, but as a non-admin, you would have to make a copy of it. But anyway, so I popped up that search in NetSuite, and what I like to do is you can edit it from here, but it's kind of a wonky process. What I'll usually do is I'll just copy that, I'll pop it in the global search, I'll hit edit, and now I can edit that save search, and I can see. So here's the criteria that I have set, and as Tyler pointed out, if we have search set in or extra criteria set in Celigo, it'll add to whatever I have set here. And then I have the results. And so the results are going to be the fields or the lines that are the rows that are pulled out of NetSuite and pushed into the flow downstream. So anyway, that's the export step out of NetSuite for the scheduled exports. I'm going to go ahead and jump back out of here, and I'm going to use this flow a little bit later to show you some other functionality. Jump back into my slideshow. And so now we're going to talk about listeners. So listeners are another type of export out of NetSuite. Listeners will monitor specific record types to detect when a change occurs, or when something happens in NetSuite to a record. Listeners react based on the execution context and execution type to control when exports run. This mechanism allows timely and automatic data synchronization without manual intervention or without scheduling. So if something happens, the flow will get that information out of NetSuite in near real time and pass it into a downstream functionality. Real-time exports improve integration efficiency by instantly pushing updates. Couple of attributes about listeners. And then I'll jump back into Celigo and we'll look at this. So record type, we're going to specify the record type of the list that the listener is going to listen to. We're going to specify the execution context, so we can define exactly when the listener will pull data into Celigo. And then we have the execution type, which it'll kind of determine the specific action that triggers the listener. So I'm going to jump back into Celigo. We'll go to this is the flow for our listener. So I have an export step here, and you can see that this is a listener. I'll make this a little bit bigger. So some key attributes. First of all, we have, well, obviously, these are always the same thing. You got to name your listener, name it something meaningful. You can put in a description, and then you choose your NetSuite connection here. So the record type is the type of record that it's listening to for changes or whatever, however you define the settings down here. In this case, I have it set to an inventory part, and an inventory part is also just basically a standard item record, an inventory item record in NetSuite. There are other types of record, like item records. You can do assembly items, but basically any record type that you want to specify is going to be listed here. The execution context, meaning what context is the listener triggered. So in this case, I have the context as user interface, but you can see there's a bunch of other options here. So for example, if you want this listener to be triggered through a CSV import, or if you want it to be triggered from a MapReduce script that runs in NetSuite, or you can a Suitelet, a user event script. Basically, you can choose all of these options. If you're not sure, I think it's best to kind of pick user interface for testing, and then you can work on making sure that the listener will trigger based on that. And then the execution type will basically let you define what activity in NetSuite is it going to trigger. So in this case, I have it set to create. You can also set it to edit. So in this case, if an item record is edited, then it would trigger the listener. If an item record is deleted, if it's an inline edit, if maybe it's a sales order or a purchase order, there's an approval state. So there's a lot of other things that can happen here that, to define that execution type. You can also include sublists with this. So if there's if it's a sales order and you want to include all of the line items or any other sublist that's attached to it, you can do that. So in this case, we have the record type is an inventory part or inventory item. The execution context is in the user interface. So that means somebody has to physically, go into NetSuite and do something. And then the execution type is create. So what I'll do real quick here is I'm going to go into NetSuite. So I'm going to create a new item record, and hopefully I can do this NetSuite Cooperate as a demo account. So I'm going to go to list items new. I'm going to go to an inventory item. And so I'm just going to create a new inventory item, and we should expect this flow. It is on. We should expect the flow to automatically trigger when I create a new inventory item in NetSuite. Test demo item, we'll say 1210. Maybe it doesn't like that slash. We'll do that one. And I'm not going to fill in anything else other than I think it's going to make me fill in this tax schedule. So I'll do that. And let's see if that's all it wants. So let's do that too. Okay, let that go and save. So we are in the user interface. We created an item record, and we should see this flow trigger. And if I go to my run history, I can see it did just run right now. And so what else do we have going on in this flow? We have this set up to send all of the data that it pulled out of NetSuite from that item record to an FTP file. And, there's 100 different use cases for this. This is just an example so that I can show you. What I can do is go to my run history, and if it sends it to an FTP, I can actually look at that file that it created. I'll just download that and see if I can open it here real quick. Okay. I need to save those. So this is all of the data that it pulled out of NetSuite, and it just popped it all into a CSV record. So maybe you need to notify another, somebody else on your team. There's a lot of different things you can do here. You can set up Slack notifications with this type of process. Kind of your imagination is the limit on what you can do with this. So, all right, so that's a listener flow or a listener export. At this point, I'll switch back over to my PowerPoint and we'll move on. So now we'll talk about transferring files out of NetSuite. So some key features of transferring files out of NetSuite. It basically acts like an FTP server flow, and it enables seamless file transfers from NetSuite to external systems. I'll talk about some advantages of using this over other processes. It supports handling of multiple file types, provides flexibility in data exchange formats. It's really easy to parse CSV and Excel files, simplifies data processing and integration workflows, and it also provides a reliable method to move large volumes of data efficiently between NetSuite and other platforms. So some of the key attributes of of a file transfer, you're going to specify the file type. We can upload a sample file so that the export step knows what to expect out of that. We set the NetSuite folder ID, and then we can group and sort records. So those are the key attributes. Again, I'm going to jump back into Celigo and demonstrate how this works. So I have this demo flow set up here, and here we have a transfer export. In the settings here, again, name the transfer, set your connection. We choose the file type. Here we can choose any type of file, CSV, EDI, different file types, fixed width, anything you want there. In Excel, XLSX, that's a key one too. That's sometimes really super convenient to have it do it from an Excel file. I've already done this part where I've uploaded a sample file, so I'm not going to do that now, but you would typically have a file sample that you were going to be transferring out of NetSuite, and you would load it here so that the flow knows what to expect. In the parser, really, like when we're doing a CSV, I always like to just come in here and check that the file has a header, because 9 times out of 10, your CSV file is going to have a header on those columns. Let's see what else. Some of these are default settings. You typically don't have to mess with them. We have a file has a header there as well. So here's kind of one of the key attributes of this flow is this folder internal ID. So this folder internal ID is the internal ID of the file cabinet folder in NetSuite that you want to pull the file out of. I'm going to go show you that in NetSuite here in just a second. And then one other thing I'll point out is that under this advanced section, there is this backup folder internal ID. So what I like to do is I like to create, I'll specify the folder that I want to pull the information out of, but then I'll set an archive folder so that the Celigo will automatically store a backup of that file in the archive folder, and then it'll take the file and pass it downstream and do something with it in the flow. You also have the option to leave the file on the server. Typically just use that for testing purposes. So you can kind of rerun the flow over and over again without Celigo pulling the file off of the server / folder out of NetSuite. So by default, Celigo will remove the folder or the file from that folder if you don't check that setting. Let's see. Okay, so I think that's the key elements there. So I'm going to jump back into NetSuite here, and I'll show you this folder. So it's under Documents, Files, File Cabinet. And I set up this folder here, Files for Celigo. So you can see here, this is the internal ID of that folder. And so that's what I'll use in the flow. If you remember, I said, okay, here's the folder that I want to pull the file out of. 13580. That's my file cabinet folder. I can look in here and can see, oh, okay, there is a file here, purchase price update from vendor file. So in this case, I have an example of like a vendor sends you pricing updates for all of the items, and you can put it into here, pull it out of NetSuite, and then push it downstream in the flow. I have another really cool use case for this that I'll talk about at the end of the meeting that we've done for several clients now that I think is pretty cool. So then here's that archive folder. And if you recall, I had that archive folder 13581. So that's my archive. I can click into that. I can see I've already done this. I've already done a test of this. So this is the file that's going to be pulled out. When I run the flow, it should then remove it from this folder. It'll put it into that archive folder. And so let me see, what else did I do? I have a lookup step here, but I'm actually this is just set to skip this step. But basically in this file, I have a whole bunch of different item records, and then the process that I've set up here for my import step, which we'll talk about imports in a minute here. I think I'm just mapping a price update. Let's just double check this. Yeah, so we're just changing the purchase price on the item records in NetSuite. So I'll go ahead and run this flow. In our little live processing visual down here. at 112 records in that file. It's going to ignore everything because I have an ignore filter on this step here. And then it's going to go through and it's going to update the item records. So we don't have to watch it do all of that. What I wanted to point out is that is what this initial step did. So if I go back into that file cabinet and I refresh, I go back to my Celigo file or folder, we can see that that file is no longer here. So Celigo pulled it out, moved it into the archive folder. So that way you can kind of do some automated processes. If you need to process files, you can have people in your company just take the file, dump it to a specific file cabinet folder. And then we also have a process where we can do it automatically via like a case capture, which I'll talk about here in a bit. So that's our transferring file out of NetSuite file cabinet process. One thing I did want to mention is that I really like using this technique of processing files versus a data loader in a lot of cases. So if you're not familiar with the data loader, it gives you the ability to basically take a CSV file or any of these other file types and push it into Celigo and then create an import step. The limitation here is that you can only create one step. You can't do anything else with with that file after this initial step, because you see we don't have like a little plus sign here. So it's a little bit limited, but this is nice if you want to do one quick update to item records. Like in this example, I could have used a data loader for this. But if you need to do multiple steps in the flow, or if you want to create any type of branching to process that file in different ways, maybe different items in that file need to be processed differently, then you would need to use this type of process where it's essentially the same thing. You have kind of a raw data file. You're getting the file out of NetSuite, but now we can add branching, so we can do different things with it. We can do a lookup step if we need to. We can do multiple processes down the way. So this transferring files out of NetSuite, I think, is a lot more flexible than the data loader, but the data loader does have use cases for sure. All right, I'm going to flip back into our PowerPoint and we'll go on to our next topic. So lookups, mentioned these before. So lookups are useful for records that are 2 tables away or more, or maybe not even related to that record at all in any way. It allows access to extra data that's not available in the standard export. It helps get additional related data that cannot be included directly in that saved search. You can also use lookups in the like we did in that transferring files out of NetSuite flow, or in a listener flow, you can use lookups. They can be used anywhere. Some key attributes of lookups. Actually, I'm going to skip that because we'll talk about that here in a second. So we have key attributes. You have a record type of the lookup. You have a save search. You want to predefine that save search in NetSuite, like we do with the scheduled flow exports. You can set additional search criteria in the attribute. So again, you can append the search criteria in that save search, and then you choose your export type. So it's very similar to a save search export, but it gives you the ability to add an extra step. I'm going to point out one thing actually, and then I'll come back to that one other topic. So this flow here, this is where I'm going to kind of demonstrate this lookup process. So this is the item fulfillment flow, and I'll go back into NetSuite and show you the use case that I have for this one. And I think I pointed this out. So there's this extra record, custom record types. So here's an item fulfillment. The scenario is the item fulfillment was created from a 3PL, third party logistics company. So you send your orders to them, they ship it, they fulfill it, they send tracking information back into NetSuite. A lot of times they have specific requirements around sending in package level detail. So carton UCC 128, that's specific to shipping carton labels, very useful or needed in EDI integrations, for example. We also have individual carton tracking. The NetSuite packages subrecord type here doesn't really support all of that extra data. So a lot of 3PLs and EDI systems will use a sub package record like this. So if I look at this well, first of all, let me point out we have two different items, this FG06, FG10. I'm going to look at this package record, and there's actually on each of these package headers, there is a package detail record. And the package detail is what actually defines the item that was shipped in this box. And then we have at the package header, we have the tracking number. So the problem here is that I need to know which item was shipped with which tracking number. And in a saved search, you can't get this information. You can get all of this information, but you can't specify, oh, this item was shipped with this specific package record. So for this example, that's the use case. I need to basically get this carton tracking number, this field over here, populated based on these custom records. So in the flow, what we've done is we get that item fulfillment. So we went through this. That's my save search for that. Then we do a lookup to that carton. So I created a save search for the carton, lookup for carton tracking. I'll go into NetSuite and just look at this real quick. So this is a Barrett package detail search. And the results are, I just need to get the carton tracking number from that carton header, right? So we just looked at those records. That's the information that I need to pull out of NetSuite. So for the lookup, I've defined this additional search criteria. So I can say that the fulfillment is any of ID. And so the ID is automatically exported by Celigo when we have a save search export. And then we say the item is any of the item. So I'm using this criteria to define in this save search what basically I'm adding that criteria here, but it's dynamic at this point. So it's dynamically going to pull out that carton tracking out of NetSuite. And then the last step is we have to add a results mapping. So I just do data, and that will do the whole array of data, and I call it carton tracking. And then in my import step or my update step, I'm gonna define the item on the item fulfillment that I'm going to update, and I'm just going to populate that carton tracking number field in NetSuite. So I'll just quickly run this flow, and we can confirm that works. Nothing like doing a live demo. I've tested it though, so fingers crossed, no problems. All right, so we can see in our exports here we have two records exported. I didn't group these, so it's going to update them individually. But then we have the lookup step. It did a lookup for two different records, found that information, passed it into this flow here, or I'm sorry, into this step, and then it updated that. So now we'll just confirm that it did what it's supposed to. If you remember, we're trying to populate this carton tracking number with the right with the correct tracking field or tracking number. And there we go. So it updated, and we can see that it's a unique tracking number to that item based on that Barrett package. So that's our use case for lookups. There's 100,000 different use cases for lookups. I think one of the key things about using Celigo is just understanding what the options are, being creative with your solutions of how you get the information in and out of the system. One other thing I wanted to point out real quick is in this additional search criteria. So one of the limitations of this is that we can't in this interface select a sub list of information to look up. And so, for example, if this was a lookup to a sales order, I can't go and say, you know how in NetSuite you can do items or item item fields dot, and then you can do a search on those, or on a save search, or I'm sorry, on a sales order or an item fulfillment. There's these line level fields, so we can't really do any filtering on those in this default UI. And I mean, I haven't seen a way to do it, but we discovered a little trick, and I'll go back to my PowerPoint and show you that. So what you can do is you can get the internal ID of that line level field, and you can use that internal ID in your field to do your search on. And so you won't see Celigo convert that into the actual field name like it does in some other examples, or in other areas. But this is a confirmed way to work, to use that line level criteria or line level field in the criteria for the searches. So that's just a little bit of a trick that actually Pierce on my team discovered that one. So that was a good one. Okay, so now we'll talk about imports. So imports overview, basically we can create or transform records or update records, all kinds of different things that we can do there. Transaction creation, we can create sales orders, transfer orders. We can transform sales orders to invoices, all kinds of different options here for the import functionality. And I want to point out that this dynamic mode is one of the key things that you should understand how this works when you're doing an import, especially as it relates to creating transactions in NetSuite. So the import operation types, we have add and update operations. We have attach, detach, associate, and unassociate. So this one, basically, you can attach or detach links, or removes one record from another. So one example could be if you have a contact record and you want to unassociate it from a company, or the other way around. If you have a standalone contact that you want to associate with a company, you can use this to update that, use an associate function or action to connect that contact to that customer. And then you also have this delete operation. And full transparency, before I did this presentation, I wasn't aware of the delete operation. So that's one of the things that I learned from doing this. And has it been there for a long time? Probably. But what I usually do is we have a mass update, a mass delete script that we create in NetSuite, and then we can define what records we want to delete via safe search. But if somebody's using Celigo, you can use this delete operation to delete a whole bunch of different records, which we've come across a lot of times, especially if we're talking about like an implementation or we're doing testing, stuff like that. You can use this delete operation to delete those records out of NetSuite. This one is important to understand, though, that it has to be used carefully because it's not reversible. When you delete those records out of NetSuite, you cannot undelete those records. So anyway, I thought that was a cool little things that I learned from this. So I'm going to go back into NetSuite here in a minute, but first of all, we'll talk about some mapping tips and tricks. I'll point this out in the mappings. You can use the internal ID of the field in NetSuite to make sure that you're mapping to the correct field in the Celigo user interface. You can handle sublists by mapping sub-records correctly. And a big use case for this one is like inventory detail records. Like if you're creating an item fulfillment or an item receipt in NetSuite, you might have to map the inventory detail or lot numbers, that type of thing. Leverage dynamic mode to simplify record creation and updates. This mimics manual user interface entry in NetSuite. Helps avoid errors related to field dependencies. I'll try and show you a quick example of that. And then also just make sure you test your mappings thoroughly to confirm that all the data, including subrecords, is transferred as expected. I always like to work in a sandbox if you're building a new flow. That way you can test to your heart's content without messing up anything in a production environment. So I'll switch back over to Celigo here. we'll look at some import functionality. So I'll just stay on this flow here. So here's my import. This was my update to the item fulfillment. In this case, we're choosing the record type that we want to update. That does not actually have to match your export step, and that's one of the coolest things that I love about Celigo is that you can have different records updating other record types in with the flow. And the reason I say that is because you can't do that with the workflow in NetSuite. In a NetSuite workflow, if you have a workflow that runs on sales orders, it can only update sales orders. There are ways to script around that and do some custom scripting, but for everyday people, you're building a workflow, and you can't you can't update an item fulfillment from a save search or from a sales order save search, for example. So here, in this case, we export item fulfillment, we're updating item fulfillment, but I just wanted to point it out here that you can update any record type here that you want to. So you can have an add function. In the add function, I highly recommend using this ignore existing records. And this ensures that you don't inadvertently create duplicate records in NetSuite. And that applies to everything: sales orders, vendors, customers, purchase orders, whatever. You don't want to create those duplicate records. So always use this how to find existing records. The best way to do that is internal ID is ID. And again, like I mentioned before, this ID is automatically exported with every save search export by Celigo. That is the internal ID of that record in NetSuite. You can also put internal ID in your save search and use that here as well, but that ID is exported by default. The update step, again, with the update step, you have to say, okay, well, what record am I going to update? So same concept. Internal ID is ID. Here's our other functions: add or update. I don't like add or update. I feel like that's just throwing caution to the wind. If I'm adding or updating, I know exactly usually what we're trying to do, and I don't necessarily want it to do that. But there are some use cases for add or update. Maybe you're importing a list of contacts and you don't want it to create duplicate contacts, so you do add it if it doesn't exist, or update it if it does exist. Here's our attach, detach, and delete options in our import step. So again, I'm not going to talk about any of the advanced functions here. We'll maybe another meeting, another day, we'll talk about those things. And then the sub record import, I won't go into a lot of detail here, but as I mentioned, here's we can update inventory details for the item fulfillment items record here. So this is where we would choose a sub record and the settings related to that. So that's it for the main settings. Let's look at some of the mappings, and you always have to do mappings on an import step, otherwise it doesn't do anything. One thing that I want to point out is if you want to map to a field on an item record, and maybe this field name has been changed on the form in NetSuite, and it doesn't actually say MFG project in Celigo. It says something else. One trick that you can do is you can get the field ID, and this is the internal ID of that field. And you can see this is a custom field that was created. And so Celigo may call it something different, or it may be something different in the Celigo UI. So I'm going to copy that. And real quick side note, if you click on a field and you don't see the field ID, you need to go to your system preferences and say show internal IDs. That's a per user setting in NetSuite. So I always turn that on because I'm always looking at those internal IDs. So what I'll do now is I'll go back into Celigo, and let's say I want to map to that custom field. I'm going to paste in the internal ID, and you can see that Celigo says, oh, I know what that is. It's MFG project. And in this case, the field type is a record. And so it'll specify a very specific record in NetSuite. But sometimes it'll be just one option here, and it'll just be the name of the field. Let's see if we can find another one. This one probably doesn't have anything else. let's see, what's this? Yeah. So that's my internal ID. I can click on it. Now Celigo knows what that field is. So that's a cool little trick to just to map the very specific field if you're not sure what you're mapping to. The other thing is the dynamic mode. So if you click use or search for use dynamic mode, and you would want to just hard code this to true, the dynamic mode basically mimics the manual user interface entry. So, for example, if I go to, let me see if I can do this quickly here. I'm going to go to this customer record. Actually, I take that back. I'm going to go and create a new sales order. I'm going to enter a new sales order. Let this catch up. Okay. But I'm gonna set this customer on that sales order. So when I go to create a new sales order, I put in the customer. Now, what I want you to notice is that there's some fields down here that are not populated right now. I'm going to put in that customer record, and NetSuite will pre-populate some of these fields based on data from that customer record. So when we use the dynamic mode, well, first of all, if we don't use dynamic mode in a Celigo integration or in an import step, it will not trigger the system to automatically fill in some of these fields. When we use dynamic mode, it will do what we just saw here in the user interface. I chose the customer record, and then it pre-populated some of these, pre-populated this lead source, it pre-populated the subsidiary. Then there may be other fields here like currency. There's also going to be probably what is it? The terms, things like that. Yeah, see, terms are pre-populated as well. So that's the use dynamic mode. If you're creating records in NetSuite, I recommend adding that. I've never seen a use case where you wouldn't want to use that. There may be some out there, but I just think it's a pretty cool function. So with that, I'm going to jump back into my PowerPoint slides. That's everything I wanted to show you on the imports. And we'll just talk about a quick summary. So everything we just talked about, exports, use save searches to query transform NetSuite data. You can schedule them to run as often as every 5 minutes. Listeners are an export. They provide real-time exports triggered by changes in NetSuite records. File transfers enable NetSuite to act like an FTP file server. Lookups, you can get extra data in your flow to add or update later on. And then the imports allows you to do record creation. You can transform records. So if you have a purchase, you have a sales order, you can transform it into an item fulfillment or an invoice from there. You can update records. You can create new records. You can delete new records. All kinds of fun stuff to do in those import steps. Okay, so I'm going to the last thing I wanted to share today is some examples of some custom flows. So one thing that I really like to do with Celigo is NetSuite to NetSuite flows. And like I mentioned earlier, workflows in NetSuite are pretty limited, especially if you want to take information from one record type and update a different record type. So you can use custom Celigo flows to do that type of automation. And then there's a couple of other processes that basically scripting would only be, you could only do with scripting in NetSuite. So custom flows in Celigo can replace workflows, they can replace scripting, but they give you full control over the process. They give you the ability to have error management, where a workflow and a script is not going to give you any insight into error management. So I just think that they're super cool, super useful. I did do a presentation on this at Suite World this year at the Celigo booth, which thank you to Celigo. That was really cool to be able to do that. So here's some of the examples that that we've done for these NetSuite to NetSuite processes or NetSuite automation. So this is one I mentioned earlier on. So this is an inbound case to capture a document for processing in another flow. So here's this scenario. You can set up case management in NetSuite, and it'll give you a very specific email address, and somebody can email to that email address with a file attachment. What that does is then it creates a case in NetSuite, and that file is attached to the case. So what we do with this flow is we take that case that's been created and we want to process that document in a different flow. So here we get the case that we want to manipulate. In this case, we're doing a separate lookup step. We're transferring the file to a new folder in NetSuite. So you know how we talked about that folder, the file cabinet folders. So here we specify the file cabinet that we're going to pull the document off of the case. We're going to transfer that file to the new folder in NetSuite, and that folder is where we're going to pull that file out of for processing in another flow. And then the next step here is that we update the case. There's a checkbox. I don't remember what this one is, but basically to mark this as this process has been completed on that case. And then we close the case, because in this scenario, the case is only used to facilitate this document file transfer process. Here's a use case that we're working on right now for a client. They have vendors that send them files for all of their different inventory products, and those files contain price updates, they contain back order dates, they contain other discontinued item status, that type of thing. So they have like 10 different vendors sending them these files. So what they're going to do is their customer service team is going to get that email and they're going to forward it to this case, this inbound case capture email in NetSuite. And that inbound case capture creates the case, and then we have a process where it gets those files and it's going to put it into a specific file cabinet folder to process later on. And then we'll take those files from the vendors, and you can do the process that we showed before, and you can go in and update all the item records automatically based on that file that you pull out. So at that point, it's basically a fully automated process of getting files from the vendors to update the item records. They just forward it to an email address, and the Celigo flows take care of the rest of the process. So I think a lot of times people think about integrations as one system to another system, but we really like to use it for these NetSuite to NetSuite automations. So here's another example of a whole process that we do. So this is a process we built for one of our clients. So this is a warranty claim processing. So this company does appliance parts, and a lot of times those appliance parts have warranties. And so if you call a service technician and they come out and they need to repair your washer, your dryer, or something, they're going to pull a part out of that washer or dryer, and that part may be under warranty, and that they're going to submit a warranty claim for that part. And so this company processes all of those. They sell all the parts, but they also do all of the warranty claim processing for their customers. So they get a warranty claim file. It's captured from that inbound email process that we just talked about. The warranty claim is validated against records in NetSuite, so they make sure that there's an invoice that they purchased that part from them, for example. Return authorization is created, an item receipt, a credit memo. So this whole process is a series of flows that will basically run one after another. And this was previously a series of scripts in NetSuite. And the problem was that it gave the users no visibility to the process to fix it when there were errors. And this solves, basically you can see, like in my example here, there's a couple of errors here, but if this were in NetSuite, they'd have no idea. If it was a fully automated process in NetSuite, they'd have no idea that there were these errors here. With this process, they get to see those errors. They can go in, they can figure out what's wrong, they can adjust it and move on. So here's a very simple use case. So NetSuite billing schedules, if you've used the billing operations in NetSuite, they're limited to a minimum of every 6 hours. So if you want to invoice your sales orders on a faster schedule, you can, the fastest setting by default is 15, but as I mentioned before, you can do it every 5 minutes if you want. That's probably overkill for this scenario. But basically, you just get a list of sales orders out of NetSuite that are pending billing, and you push it into this import step that will transform that sales order. A basic transform is the term used for creating invoice from a sales order, and it'll create those invoices. So just another simple use case of a basic flow in Celigo. Here's another good one. Automatically create journal entries based on credit memos. So in this case, this company, they have a Shopify to NetSuite integration. They have the refund flow that creates the credit memos and customer refunds in NetSuite, but they wanted their accounting team wanted to reclass the freight expenses. And so they wanted to put it under a different GL account in NetSuite. So that requires a journal entry. So this flow gets these credit memos out of NetSuite, and the safe search identifies which ones that they want to pull out. It creates the journal entry in NetSuite, and then it'll update the credit memo to say journal entry created. And there may be some other functions in this step here too, because if you recall on the export one time option in the export here, you can also just choose a checkbox field, and it'll check that automatically. Sometimes it gives you a little bit of guff when you're trying to use that. So we might have to use an update step like this. But anyway, again, this is NetSuite to NetSuite automation. I think you're limited by your imagination here. In this case, this is so I know that there's a new update for this in the Shopify integration, but this problem has been going on for a while where there's these channel liable sales tax. So what a lot of sellers do that are selling on Shopify is they'll list on Facebook or TikTok or one of these other marketplaces because it's super easy to do. You basically essentially just turn on a setting and it pushes your products to one of these other marketplaces. But these marketplaces collect tax, and it's called marketplace tax. But that tax is collected and remitted by Facebook or by TikTok or whoever, and the company using NetSuite here doesn't want that tax to show in their system. So this process basically gets those orders that are marked as channel liable, which is a custom mapping. It finds the customer deposit, it removes the tax from the sales order, and then updates the amount on the customer deposit. So this was a workaround to make sure that the tax that was collected that is never remitted to the company from Shopify is never in their NetSuite account because it shouldn't be shown. I think the update to the Shopify integration will map those to a specific GL account, but then they're still showing in NetSuite, and I'm not sure what happens with the credit memo or with the customer deposit on that one. So anyway, this is another example, NetSuite to NetSuite process, automating processes. The last one that I have here is a very specific use case. I just think that the flow looks really cool, and so I wanted to show it here today. So this is ARM, which is Advanced Revenue Management in NetSuite. So ARM requires a lot of the time a separate start and end dates on the lines for proper revenue recognition. And so in this example, this company sells a subscription, like a software subscription product, and the subscription has a term of like 1 year or 3 years or 5 years, but to recognize the revenue correctly for that, the term needs to be set. Each line needs to have its own specific term. So if it's a 5-year term, you would ideally have 5 different lines on the order that say, okay, here's the term 25 to 2025, 2026, and then we have another line for 26 to 27, and so on. So this flow will take those sales orders out of NetSuite. It'll determine what well, first of all, it'll close the original line because that line isn't going to be used anymore. It'll determine what the contract term is. So if it's a 5-year term, it goes down this branch. If it's a 4-year term, it goes down this branch, 3 years and 2 years. And each one of these steps is creating a new sales order line in NetSuite that's calculated off of the original order dates. So again, just NetSuite to NetSuite, using Celigo as a tool for NetSuite automation. I think it's super powerful, and there's a ton of flexibility and things that you can do there that I think a lot of people aren't using Celigo for that type of functionality. So, all right. Well, I tried to stay within an hour or so. We're what, an hour 10 minutes here. So thank you for joining. Thank you for listening today. I really appreciate you being here for our first Celigo user group meeting. We're going to go into our open forum session now. So if anybody has any questions, anything else you want to talk about, we can do that now. And again, there'll be a survey. I'll send the survey out via email. So please take a few minutes to fill that out, and so that we can think about the different topics that we want to do in the future. Tell your colleagues, tell everybody that you know that's a Celigo user or anybody in your company to join the user group. And we hope to grow this over time and get a lot more participation, a lot more people being a part of our community. So again, last thing is thank you again to Celigo for your support, and we'll do the raffle a little bit later on that. I'll announce that on LinkedIn when we're done. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to actually stop our recording as well. If